And another thing, the HBO execs who greenlit this whole documentary, there's a special place in hell right next to the devil reserved for you. Now that documentary from the previous picture is related to this megalomaniac right here. Her name is Renee Bach, and this story is from NPR, and the title reads, American with no medical training ran center for malnourished Ugandan kids. 105 died. And I think we can go ahead and redo this title because Renee Bach helped unalive 105 children in Uganda. So this documentary is based off of Renee Bach, who at the time was a young missionary who went, I believe, in the early 2010s. I think it was like 2011, 2012. She goes on a mission trip to Africa, specifically Uganda, comes back and feels like this is her calling. So she comes back to the United States. She raises hundreds of thousands of dollars. Okay. All of the money that she raises is not fully disclosed, but she raises a bunch of money to go back and help. And since she has no sort of medical training at all, she's not a nurse, she's not a tech, she's not a doctor, she's not a PA, she's not an MP, she's not a mental health counselor, she's not a nothing. Goes back and decides to give back by opening a nutrition clinic. However, this nutrition clinic has much more than food there. They have medical gear such as oxygen tanks, IV catheters, monitoring equipment. Like, this lady is doing the most and thinks that she's walking in her purpose as she's blatantly experimenting on people's kids by testing out her lack of skills on these people in this country. So this article here is from the NPR story that I highlighted before. A registered nurse from North Dakota goes on a medical mission and she discovers this center, this nutrition center, and she was blown away. While she was there, she found that these kids weren't just malnourished. They had very complicated illnesses. She noted that a lot of the kids had pneumonia, intestinal parasites, TB, and a lot of them had stage 4 HIV. So this woman has so much audacity that she was keeping a regular blog post. Note, the blog post is how she was able to elicit donations from people here in the U.S. So she has this blog post where she's talking about the care that she's rendering to these children, right? Hooking them up to oxygen, taking their temperature, starting IV, checking their blood sugar, testing them for malaria, and so on and so forth. And one of the posts, she talks about this 9-month-old baby coming in, all the things that she did to them. And then she says I was attempting to diagnose the many problems that could potentially be at hand. And I got it. It was malaria. The patient had a hemoglobin of 3.2, which is a big problem and most likely fatal. That is accurate. And needed a blood transfusion fast. Now, where she got the blood from is unbeknownst to me when reading the article. But the nurse that was visiting from North Dakota happened to be there during the time when she was treating this 9-month-old baby. The nurse comes in and realized, like, this baby's having a transfusion reaction. And Bach is asking her, like, hey, I'm trying to Google and I think it's a reaction. However, I don't see a rash. And the Kramlich, who is the visiting nurse from North Dakota, soon realizes, like, this lady is way out of her depth. And I would venture to say she was probably thinking, like, this lady is not wrapped too tight at all. Now, eventually, the Ugandan government sued Renee Bach, and this is one of the pieces of evidence that they had, which is from her blog. So she's cataloging all of these things, and as you can see here, you don't have to be a medical professional. If you've ever seen a TV show with any sort of medicine going on, she has this quote-unquote nutrition clinic set up like a triage center. Right? This baby is hooked up to all sorts of things. None of these things she has prior knowledge of how to use, what it's supposed to do, nothing. So I'm very curious to find out what the take of the filmmakers are of this specific situation of this documentary here on HBO, Savior Complex. Because by all intents purposes and by the definition of the word, this woman is a serial killer. And I think she's from Virginia or something like that. She's in her home state chilling while 105 families have lost their children. And this brings me to another point. There's different forms of medical tourism, right? You have the medical tourism where people are going to places like Mexico, DR, Colombia for cosmetic surgery. But there's a version of medical tourism that's deeply linked to missionary work, where people feel like because they live in one country and they go to another one where people probably don't have all of the advantages of the countries that they're from, that they can go and do whatever they like, whether they're trained for it or not, and consider it to be help. Consider it to be their divine calling from a higher power. And it's just not right. Because personally, I feel like she deserves a fully paid trip back to Uganda, because them people are looking for her and they want her to come outside. They want to talk to her.